Hi guys, today we are going to learn how to make the bezel for our rings. First thing you have to do is pick out your stone, which we've already done, and they are cabochon stones, which means they're flat on the bottom and domed. And the domes are all different sizes. These are all kind of handmade with all different lapidary tools, and depending upon the stone, some will be very puffy, some will be flat. So they'll all need different size bezels to hold them. For example, this one looks like it would never hold that stone. This little bezel wrap has to fold over the stone to hold it in. You don't want too much bezel, but you need enough to hold it in. If you chose the gallery wire or the hearts or the crowns, you won't have a choice on the height. You may have to change what you chose depending upon what stone you have. But if you have the serrated, the scalloped, or the plain bezel wrap, you'll have a choice of 1/4 inch, which you probably won't have to use. That's for very tall stones or dichroic glass, where you need something very, very tall to hold in the stone. For all the other bezel wraps, you can choose 1/8 or 3/16. That's the most frequently used. We also have a 3/32. If you have a teeny tiny stone, you may want to use the very thin wrap. Okay, now how do you determine which wrap you need? Well, you're going to scrunch down and you're going to place the bezel wrap up against your stone. Now here's the 1/8 of an inch, and I usually close one eye because it helps me to see better. Oh, this is a tough one. It's a really puffy stone. I'm not sure if the 1/8 of an inch. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but the stone kind of angles up, and that might hold it. You want to be sure that when you fold that bezel in, that it's going to grab onto the stone, okay? And I think that this one is just too tall. If I used this one, by the time I wrapped it in, half of the stone would be covered. If this one isn't tall enough for your stone, you would use this one, but you would just file it down. But I think this is going to be fine. So I'm going to use the 1/8 of an inch. So then, let's see, we picked out our bezel strip. We go to number 2. Up on the top, use double stick tape to connect the stone to the tag board. In this little yellow container, I've got pieces of cardboard. Over here I've got double stick tape. What I'm going to do is put some tape on the bottom of the stone and put it on the cardboard. This keeps the stone still. Otherwise it wobbles all over the place and it's hard to get a good wrap. All right, so we're going to wrap this bezel wrap around the stone. And because it's taped, it sits still. I'm going to take a Sharpie. Don't use your teeth. And I'm going to mark where it connects. Ooh, did you hear the gases on? Yeesh. All right, make sure when you use the Sharpie that you put it back in the log cabin picture so that we always know where it is. This bezel wrap is made of fine silver. Does anyone know the difference? Did we talk about the difference between fine silver and sterling silver?
No.
Okay, fine silver is pure silver. It's very, very soft. Sterling silver is 7.5% copper. The copper gives it strength and makes it stronger. You wouldn't want fine silver for the ring shank because you would bend it, it would get destroyed. However, when we wrap this stuff around the stone, we want it to be soft so we can easily bend it in to hold the stone. When you bend it in, you'll be work hardening it because you're burnishing it, so it'll be strong enough to hold the stone. Okay, so this is fine silver. All right, so now I wrapped it around. I can put this thing back. I don't need it anymore. I'm going to hold the stone upside down. There's still a piece of tape on it. I'm going to take the tape off. I'm going to hold the stone upside down to make sure that I cut this right. I hold it upside down because if you hold it the right way with the dome part on the top, it's harder. When you hold it upside down, you have the flat part of the stone to wrap this bezel around and make sure it's the right size. This looks like it might be a tiny bit too big. Another very important feature of doing this is if one of your sides, if the person before you cut crooked, before you even start, and that's what the problem is, the person before me cut this crooked, so I've got a little bit of an angle. I'm going to cut that off. Teeny tiny piece, because you want a perfectly straight edge. This is going to show on your ring, this connection, so it's got to be perfect. All right. You don't want it to be too big. If this wrap is too large, it won't hold your stone. If it's too small, because it's fine silver and it's so soft, we can stretch it a little. But you don't want it too big or too small. You want it just right. Okay, so I've got it. I've got the connection pretty much just right. So now what I want to do is, remember when we were making our links, how we work hardened it and pushed the links past each other? You're kind of doing that now, but I'll take my little pointer here. We want to go for this shape, okay? The metal will be domed on the top, and the seam is going to be in the center on the bottom. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to bend it so that this seam is pretty much in the middle, and when I go to solder on the soldering block, both sides of this bezel wrap are going to get heated at the same time, and hopefully the solder will make a connection. You can see that when I cut it and when I folded it, the metal curled up a little. So I'm going to use flat nose pliers to flatten it. This is really an important part because you need a perfect connection. I'm work hardening it. You all know how to do that. I'm looking at this. There's still, I think there's still a little crooked edge. If you don't have a perfect connection, you're going to see this. So it's worth it to take the time to make it perfect at this point. Oof. Okay, so I've work hardened it. You can't have any overlap, and you want this right in the center. So I've got this here, and oh, well, it usually won't stand up. What you're going to do is you're going to lean it on some of the broken blocks. All right? I'm going to put a little flux on the seam. And what I did today was I emptied out all of the solder trays because they are all mixed up. It's critical that you use the right solder at this point. The 3 different solders that we use are hard, medium, and easy. Hard melts at 1365. Its liquidous state, which means when it becomes liquid, is at 1450 degrees. So to make this connection, we're going to use hard, and it's going to go up to 1450. The next time we solder and we connect this to the base, we're only going to go up to 1360, because if we go all the way up to that 1450 degrees, we're going to disconnect this first join. Do you know what I mean? Do you understand what I'm saying? So we've got like 90 degrees to play with there. So if that first join becomes disconnected, you've got to probably start the whole thing again. So you don't want that to happen. So we start with hard solder. You all know how to cut solder. Now, I know I've made a big deal about just cutting little teeny pieces. It's really critical at this point that you just use little pieces because the solder is stiff. And when you go to push this fine silver around your stone, if you have a big blob of solder, it's a lump on the bezel, so you don't want that. So for this bezel, I would probably use a piece, whoops, about this size. All right? Don't use bigger because it's going to be a big old ugly blob. All right? And at this point, you kind of know. You think I tortured you, making you do all those links for nothing. I tortured you so that when you get to this point, you should understand how the solder works. Oh, wow. All right, now, because, oh, someone changed the tip. Because this is so thin and fine, we don't use the regular tips. We use a smaller torch. We use what's called a 0 torch. These are 2s that we normally use every day. Nope, these are 1s that we use. The 2s we use when we're casting. And we have a 0-0 that's even smaller than this. The 0 and the 2 0 tips that I have will be on both ends when you start this. And you can start on Monday if you're done with your other project. The tip on this is about that big, all right? It's very fine. And just like with your links, you don't go right into where the solder is because you'll blow it away. So I'm heating around, heating around. You'll see the silver get a little brown. Now this stuff is so thin, it melts really, really quickly, so you've got to be careful. You got to keep your eye on it. If you see it turn red at any point, even pink, move your torch away. The flux got powdery, so I know the flux is dry. And I go right in for it, and I got it. Pick it up, flip your brick. Okay, now I want to make sure that it fits my stone right. Didn't solder. Okay, guess what it did? It went to one side. So unfortunately, I have 2 options. I can try to drip it down, or I can add more solder, which is going to add more hard surface to it, but that's what I'm going to do. Just make sure it's together good.
Why aren't you dripping it down?
What, sweetheart?
Why aren't you dripping it down?
Because it's so thin, by the time I get it to the heat that I need it to, I'll probably melt it. So what I'm going to do, I've got the solder on this side. I'm going to put a teeny piece of solder on the other side, and when I heat it, hopefully they'll just come together. And sometimes it just doesn't work. Figures it would be during my demo, but all right, so let me take a teeny piece of solder. Teeny, teeny, tiny. I'm going to put it just on the opposite side of where the solder is. If it will cooperate. I did put flux on, right? Hopefully. Hopefully it's even there. I can't even see it. Okay. Again, same thing. Heat around, heat around. Now you really have to be so careful to be using hard solder, guys. Come on, connect. Okay. All right, this time I did it. All right, so now you have to make sure your stone fits. We've got kind of a wonky shape here, so I'm going to just push it down over my stone, and the stone will make it the right shape. Now, again, if it's too large, you're better off cutting the solder joint and redoing it because it won't hold your stone. You can see now how this is going to bend in and hold the stone. You have to be able to put the stone in from the top. I'm going to use the bezel, the ring mandrel, just to perfect the round shape. You need to be able to just gently slip the stone in from the top. If you have to force it, Once you connect